Hi there. In today's video, we're going to delve into the answer to the question, how does competition affect an athlete's mental health? Competition is what drives athletes, right? The love of competition. So as they begin to adopt that as part of who they are and they get all the emotional aspects that come with being highly competitive and competing and the accolades that can come from competing, sometimes when you leave that, it can have a detrimental impact on one's mental health. We'll explore that and talk about that in today's video. The first part of this video, we're going to talk about the nature of competition and pressure that can come from the very nature of competing. Thirdly, we're going to look at how the transition out of, in particular, professional sports, but even could be college sports, where you have poured your heart and soul into a sport and that competition, how transitioning out of that can create some challenges for athletes' mental health. Fourth, we're going to look at how competition during your career as an athlete, when you are competing on a regular basis, and in the transition after your career, how that can take a toll on your personal relationships and thereby impact your mental health. Lastly, we're going to look at a real-life example of how this played out in the life of an athlete. So the nature of athletic competition is about performing well enough so that you win. That's the ultimate idea. You also might be competing, putting pressure on yourself to get better and better, to outperform yourself. Because part of what your goal is, if you're competing with yourself and standards you set for yourself, regardless of whether you are focused on beating your opponent. This sometimes happens in individualized sports, but you're still placing that pressure on yourself to see more and more improvement and to get better and better. That's that very nature of competition. So whether it is about competing against somebody else and trying to beat them or defeat the opponent, or whether you are competing with yourself and your own standards, that leads to kind of an internalized pressure where this is what you are trying to achieve and I need to achieve it, and if I don't, something bad's going to happen. This is kind of that negative aspect to the competition or the pressures that you're putting on yourself. So when you are competing over extended periods of time, right, and you're constantly trying to win, to be the best, to outperform yourself, and again, you're putting your pressure on the outcome, right? That is what's creating that internalized pressure, is the outcome. And if you don't achieve that outcome, you feel that kind of negativity. There's a quote from the movie Moneyball where the main character in that movie is the general manager for the Oakland A's, but he says he hates losing more than he likes winning. And that sort of kind of competitive mindset has the potential to create a lot of negative emotions inside you when you are losing, when you feel that negative emotions that come from a loss. Some athletes can use that as motivation, but sometimes that negative emotion can become the dominant factor, and that impacts their mental health and ability to perform. It kind of becomes that downward cycle. So you can use it for motivation, but you have to learn how to reframe the situation to use it properly. One of the things about competition that can happen to some athletes is the nature of competition is it's a highly emotional experience, right? You are striving to beat your opponent, striving to win in some capacity, whether it's, win a race, win a team sport event, or just kind of beat your own performance from the past. You're putting a lot of emotions into that outcome, in that competition with yourself or with somebody else. And because you're expending so much energy and emotion, and the negative aspect of losing often can wear on you more than the positive emotion of winning, and over a long term can burn you out. One of the examples I think I use in another video is Bjorn Borg, who retired at age 26. Reaching the peak of his tennis playing years, he walked away from the game, and he says later on he had no regrets, but a lot of it was the emotional toll of that high degree of competitive nature, and the competitive aspect just took its toll on him emotionally. So he kind of burnt out. And that can happen to athletes at a relatively young age because of all the energy they expend on those emotions, on the emotion of competition. So one thing athletes, particularly if they've been on it for a long time, but I've seen this happen even with college athletes, where you've been competing at a high level for a number of years, and you've loved competing. That's why you kept doing it. And at the higher level you compete, the more you're putting into that, right? And because it's been part of your life, really, in all likelihood, since you're a young kid, that's when you first, in all likelihood, if you're competing at the college level or beyond, you started at a young age. And this has been part of who you are, it's part of your identity. So giving that up can be hard emotionally. It can really wear on your emotions, particularly when you have attached that to your identity and now you aren't doing it at that level anymore. People will often try to find a new outlet, and it can be quite challenging. Even high school athletes who go on to college, sometimes when that big moment in high school, right? High school sports can mean a lot to your community. Winning that state championship, being highly competitive in a high school that expects a lot of their sports teams can be a big deal. And sometimes for those athletes going on to college, the same environment isn't even the same. So you might be competing for a league championship in college that doesn't have the same impact as a league championship in high school. And that emotional kind of withdrawal, even at that level, sometimes can have an impact on them emotionally and their mental health. So then you remove that one layer more, and you've been competing at a high level through high school, through college, even professionally, and now you have to step away from the sport and the game, and it's that void, right? It's that sense of loss of something that you've expended so much time and energy and love for, that if you don't manage that well, can lead to some challenging situations for you in your mental health, and all that implies with relationships and everything else. So when athletes have walked away from the game, right, and it's been part of their life and part of who they are, and all the that missing component, and trying to find new outlets for that, it can, when you don't handle it well or deal with it well, your emotions play out, and oftentimes your own behaviors can put stress on the relationships that you're in. The people closest to you can bear the brunt of how you're trying to deal with that, and if you aren't dealing it well in a healthy way, you can exasperate that problem by putting pressure on your relationships that come back in a negative way, and it can really cycle downhill. A real life example of this really is Michael Jordan. So I've talked about him in other videos, but Michael Jordan, obviously a highly driven athlete, highly successful. His drive to be the best was difficult sometimes on his teammates, and certainly within his family. And when he stepped away from it twice, right? So he stepped away from basketball shortly after his father was murdered, and tried to kind of find a new outlet with professional baseball. Then he came back and had another successful run with the Chicago Bulls, highly driven to succeed. Then when he finally stepped away from the game for good, there was a big void in his life that he was trying to fill. And he has talked publicly about some of the struggles he had, gambling addiction that he had, the relationships in his family relationships, and the impact on his marriage, and all of these things really were as a result of Michael struggling to fill that competitive outlet and that competitive drive in a healthy way. And that can be a real challenge for any athlete who has made that part of who they are, and it's been such a part of their life. It doesn't necessarily have to be a professional athlete, right? It can happen as a college athlete where you've been competing at a high level for your whole life, and now it's over, and what do I do now? How do I fill that now? And how you handle that can have a negative impact on your relationships, which then impacts you even more because those relationships are important to you, and your way of dealing with the stress and anxiety associated with losing something that was part of who you were negatively impacts that, and it just kind of cycles downward. So you've got to find tools and strategies for dealing with that in a healthy way. Please, I invite you to subscribe to our channel, check out our other videos, but you also might be very interested in registering for our free webinar, The Psychology of Winning. The link to that webinar will be found in the description of this video, so I strongly encourage you to check out that webinar today.